Hey everyone, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with the video series on the Philidor defense, named after everybody's favorite player, Andrei Danikin Philidor. I think he had more names too. Not only was Philidor a great chess player, he also composed positions in the endgame especially, rook and bishop versus rook and pawn endgames, very famous Philidor position. He was possibly and or probably the best player in the world at his time, which was a few hundred years ago. And his opening isn't super popular today, but I think it's going to come back into fashion. Now, the main way to play the Philidor for black is after e4, e5, which obviously is very popular, and then the move knight f3. If you watch Super Grandmaster play today, I would say at least 99% of the games, black either plays knight to c6 or knight to f6, the Petrov. But the Philidor, which was very popular 100, 200, 300 years ago, is the move d6. And I guess one of the reasons it's not popular today, especially if you're teaching beginners how to play, is it blocks in the bishop on f8. Although actually in a lot of Ruy Lopez openings, which start with knight c6, or a lot of Petrovs that start with knight f6, black's bishop goes to e7 anyway, so I'm not sure that's a big deal. And also, a lot of times, black's playing d6 in the Petrov and in the Ruy Lopez, so there's nothing really wrong with the Philidor. One of the bad things about the Philidor is one of the most famous games ever played, if not the most famous game ever played, the opera game, which you've seen several videos on already on many websites, including here on chess.com, is well, white won a very brilliant game since Morphy was white, and okay, the guys with black weren't at Morphy's level, and that started as a Philidor, of course, and we'll talk about that later. Now, when lower ranked players are playing, you see a lot of moves here from white. You see knight c3, you see bishop c4. However, when grandmasters are playing, we only see one move here, and that move is d4. And generally in chess, when you can play e4 and d4, that's very nice. And problem is on move 2, if white decides to play d4, black's going to take it, and white doesn't really want to move his queen out. So we're playing knight f3 first, and then after knight c6, of course, we can play the Scotch if we want. After knight f6, d4 is one of the main moves, maybe not the main move, but after d6, all the grandmasters play the move d4. And while this is an overview of the opening, we're not going to get deep into variations this video. Luckily, this is a 10-video series, so we're going to really delve deep into the opening in later videos. But basically, what I want to talk about this video is this is going to be the starting position in the Philidor for this move order. And we're going to talk about other move orders in our next video. In this position, strangely, the most common move is e takes d4, although that's not the most common position in the Philidor, because there's other ways to transpose in the Philidor, and we don't play this way. There's nothing wrong with e takes d4, of course. Other moves that are popular go up and down in popularity in order. Black can also play knight f6, which attacks the pawn on e4, of course. Black can also play knight to d7, which is probably what I would play if I had black in this position. Occasionally, I play the Philidor. Obviously, that defends the pawn on e5. And the third move, and again, as I said earlier, the start of the opera game, is the move bishop g4, which has a bad reputation basically due to that game. And actually, I almost never have white in the Philidor because I usually don't play e4, but I actually had a transposition once in a big tournament in Michigan, which is, I guess, an oxymoron, a big tournament in Michigan. It was the state championship. And I was like, oh boy, the opera game. And I remember when I took on e5, I was waiting for bishop takes f3, which is the start of the Morphy game. And my opponent instantly played the move knight d7. It's a pawn sacrifice. I'm not sure if he made it up, but he was rated 2,000. It's not a good pawn sacrifice. I took on d6. I was up a pawn, and I won the game eventually. Obviously, he knew the famous Morphy game and didn't want to repeat that. So I think for the videos we're going to make for the series, this will be the starting position after white plays the move 3d4. And For the transpositions, which we're going to talk about in a later video, this position won't necessarily occur because one thing black can do, which I believe is a little bit safer, is play d6 on move 1, and now he's threatening the pawn on e4, and we'll get the Philidor this way, which is a little bit different than the Philidor we're talking about right now. And it's almost always going to transpose after knight f3, knight bd7. Okay, so to recap, the Philidor, the most important move in any Philidor that makes it a Philidor is the move d6. You can play it on move 1, and probably the more common move order is to play it on move 2, defending your pawn on e5. So that was an overview of the Philidor defense, not to be confused with Philidor's other famous positions in rook and bishop versus rook and rook and pawn versus rook. Philidor was not only a great chess player, he was a great pianist, a great composer of music, and a great problem composer. But this is his famous opening, and we're going to talk about that in the next videos that we make. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold. That's the overview of the Philidor. And see you in later videos, and we'll get deeper into the opening. Bye, everybody. Hey everybody, once again, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with our next video in the Philidor Defense series. This one is called Move Order Issues. And actually, for me personally, this is the most important video, although you may not agree, you may not care about the move order as much as I do. Now, when I play the Philidor, which is rare, but I play it, I don't play E5 on move 1. And I do play E5 on move 1. So if you're playing me in a tournament, and I play E5 here, I'm not going to play the Philidor. And I'm going to tell you why. Now, the way I play the Philidor is I play D6, and then I play knight F6. And in this position, if white wants to, and sometimes white wants to, white can trade on E5 and trade queens. This is my game with chess.com aficionado, Grandmaster Robert Hess. And you'll see him working for chess.com basically everywhere, playing in Arena Kings and doing his Twitch stream and working with Danny and Title Tuesday, and he's all over the place. He's a really nice guy. He's a really great commentator. He's a really great player. And this was a game that we drew in the U.S. Championship several years ago. And I know a lot of you guys like to castle, but once the queens are off the board, it's not a big deal. And theory doesn't necessarily give white an advantage here. But, you know, Robert likes to play slightly offbeat stuff, and I do too. Okay, so instead of taking the pawn on E5, it's more common to play knight F3. And, wow, this is the real starting position, I think, of the Philidor defense. And when I checked my database, which is pretty up to date, I think I have about 7.3 million games, and maybe some grandmasters have more games than I do. There was over 15,000 games in this position. So that's pretty important. And white actually has several moves here that are theory, and we're going to concentrate on 3 during the video. Now, before we look at this in the next videos, I want to go back to move 1, okay? And I want to show you what happens if we play the Philidor the normal way, let's say, and why I don't do that. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just telling you why I don't. So this is the normal Philidor. Black plays E5 on move 1, D6 on move 2. And here, if black wants to get to that position that we just looked at after 6 bishop E7, one common way to do it is to play knight F6. And now I'll show you how we can do it. We can do it is knight C3, knight B D7, and here we go. This is the position that I just showed you. Actually, it's 5 bishop E7. I guess I was ahead of myself. And the reason I personally don't like to play it this way is instead of knight C3, white can also take on E5. And now I'm not going to take back on E5 because after the queen trade, my E5 pawn is hanging. I don't have time to take on E4 because knight F7 check is winning. Therefore, after taking on E5, black must play knight takes E4. And this line was considered about equal about 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And now I think white's clearly better. Queen to D5, threatening the knight. The knight doesn't have a lot of squares. It has one, C5. If it goes somewhere else, it can be captured. And now this is the move that I think gives white the advantage. I think if white plays a normal developing move like knight C3 or bishop E2 or bishop E3, black's fine. But bishop G5 is quite annoying. And the reason is there's 2 logical moves for black, but I don't like either one of them. Some people don't agree with me, and they'll play this with black. Queen D7 looks really strange to me, blocking the bishop on C8. The other move is bishop E7. That looks more logical. And now we take the pawn on D6, and you can't take with the bishop because it's pinned. You'd lose your queen. If you take with a pawn, you're really messing up your pawn structure. You have an isolated D-pawn basically for no reason. White has a nice advantage there. So we take with the queen, keeping our structure intact. And after knight C3, in my database, your database may vary, white scores over 70%. White has a lead in development. White's ready to castle queenside. Black's queenside isn't developed. Black's knight on C5 is a little funny too. I'm not sure why that's there. So even though it looks sort of symmetrical, white's doing really well in this position. I don't want to have a symmetrical pawn structure and be down in development and have a worse position. So I don't like this very much. The other move I could play on move 6 after bishop G5 is queen D7. And once again, we take on d6, and we just develop normally. And again, not sure why that queen's on d7. White has an advantage here, and white scores over 60%. In my database, I don't want to score 25, 35% with black. I'd like to score better than that. And to give you guys an overview of the way I think about stuff, when I look at an opening in a database, I think white should score about 53, 54%. That seems fair. If white's scoring 60, 70, 80%, that usually means the opening is good for white. So the move order that I recommend highly after e4 is to play d6 on move 1, then play knight f6, and now we get an e5. And this is not what Philidor had in mind, but times change, things improve, and eventually we get to what I call our mainline starting position after bishop e7. Once again, over 15,000 games in this position. Okay, so that was the move order issues video, and we're going to delve deeper into the more complex variations in later videos. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the series on the Philidor defense. See you guys next time.
Let's have a bit of fun till I downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side, my love. But you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose. You say you wanna cry, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose. Let's have a bit of fun till I downfall. My love, if you feel like I do right now, don't say you're on the run to the other side, my love. You say you wanna try, but you never do. Sugar, there's a reason why we lose. You say you wanna try, but you Open eye, feel the waves cut through me, hypnotized by the sounds I'm breathing in. Hold tight, chemicals collide. Hold tight, hold tight, hold tight. Dripping lights paint the skies, all because of you. Dripping lights paint the skies, only you can make me move. You can make me move. Can make me move. You can make me move. Can make me. So alive, make it last forever. Stop in time, yeah, I'm surrendering. Hold tight, chemicals collide. Hold tight, hold tight, hold tight. Dripping lights paint the skies, all because of you. Dripping lights paint the skies, only you can make me move. You can make me move. Can make me move. Can make me move. You can make me move. Can make me.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And
Everybody, Grandmaster Ben Feingold here again with a new video in the Philidor Defense series. This video I like to call Mainline Number 1. Mainline Number 2 is coming up. And if you watch the previous videos, you'll remember that I like this move order: D6 first, Knight F6, E5, And we get to what I call the starting position here, and both sides castle. Okay, this position, white has two moves that are very common at the grandmaster level. In 2011, as some of you know, I played a match at the St. Louis Chess Club with Ray Robson. I forgot the result of the match. I think if I won the match, I would have remembered. That sort of tells you who won the match. Anyway, I was supposed to play Victor Korchnoi. He actually signed the contract. That would have been like an amazing thing for me to play a match with Korchnoi. I can't even believe I had the opportunity. Unfortunately, he fell ill, and I think he hurt his leg and he couldn't travel. So my opponent got 65 years younger. However, Ray Robson's easier to prepare for than Korchnoi. Korchnoi plays every opening. Well, he did. And Ray Robson, pretty stringent on sticking to the main lines. So I learned the Philidor defense really well, and I knew that Ray Robson would know I don't play the Philidor, so he wouldn't prepare for it, and I would know what he would do, and things went off swimmingly. In fact, the first 17 moves of the game I had prepared, and I had a novelty ready on move 17. So he played the main move, rook to e1. This is an excellent move. It defends the e-pawn some more, and we can drop the bishop back to f1 if we want, which I like to do. And if there's ever a trade here on d4, it's easier for white to get an e5 later because his rook's on e1. Okay, black plays c6, which lets the queen have some air, and probably more importantly, prepares later in the game for black to play either b5 or d5 and gain some space. Okay, and white doesn't want black to play b5 and attack the bishop and then attack the knight. So white plays a4, very normal positional move. And now you may have noticed that we've done a lot of developing here with both sides, and white's ready to develop his bishop wherever he wants, probably not h6. And the black bishop on c8, conversely, which happens in a lot of openings, isn't really ready to do anything. In the Philidor with black, it's actually very common for black to move his bishop either to b7 or a6, depending on the situation. And in this situation, we're going to go to b7, so we play the move b6. And we fianchetto the bishop. This is a common idea. And you may have noticed, since most of black's pawns are on dark squares, his white squares are slightly weaker, and white tries to take advantage of this by playing the move d5. And it would be very passive for black to play c5. Then almost all of his pieces are terrible, and white has a space advantage in the center. Grandmasters would love to have white here. So instead, black takes on d5, white takes with the knight, and black fianchettos his bishop. And this became one of the main lines, mainly due to the fact that Kasparov played it, and Kasparov got a good position. So, okay, and here, white does the same thing black did, but for a different reason. You may have noticed the pawn on d6 looks a little weak, and in fact, when I was making the video series on the Philidor here, in my preparation, it occurred to me this looks a lot like a Najdorf Sicilian. The pawn structure does, except the queenside pawns, instead of the A pawn moving one square, the B pawn did. Otherwise, this is the same kind of pawn structure. And the problem with black's position in those openings is white has the D5 square and the D6 pawn is weak. And white tries to take advantage of that by playing the excellent move B3. The bishop wants to go to A3 later, pressuring the pawn. In fact, if white could cheat, I said if, white could play bishop A3, knight takes E7, and then bishop takes D6, winning. So, other thing that's good about B3, it defends the bishop on C4, which wasn't defended and is on an open file. Speaking of the open file, rook C8. And now, some of you may already know this, when you have a piece on D5 and it can't be attacked by a pawn, you want to keep a piece there, because then the pawn on D6 can later be captured or become weak, and your piece on D5 is unassailable. Well, in those instances, when the opponent captures on D5, you almost always want to capture with a piece. If you capture with a pawn, well, you don't have a piece in your opponent's territory, and you're blocking your attack of the D6 pawn. Having said that, rook C8 has sort of a minor threat. Now, if black keeps taking on D5 and white keeps taking with pieces, well, the c pawn's going to be undefended. Okay, and you don't have to take with a piece on d5. You could capture with the pawn, but white doesn't want to. White wants to keep a piece on d5. Therefore, he protects his pawn with the move rook e2. This does two things. Obviously protects the pawn, but maybe later we'll play rook d2 and we'll really attack that d pawn. Bishop a3, that pawn's looking weak. Okay, and in games 20, 30, 40 years ago, black was trading on d5, and an improvement came along, the move knight c5. This does several things. Puts pressure on e4. In fact, it's attacked right now. And even though white doesn't have an issue with that, he can stop that. Black can play knight e6 later. The knight's really good on e6. It could go to d4 or f4, or back to c5 later. And the knight on d7, it wasn't really doing very much. Okay, so white doesn't want to lose his e-pawn. He takes the knight on f6, getting rid of one of the attackers. And then, as I said earlier, wants to put a piece on d5, not queen to d5. If you think queen to d5 is a good move, this video may be too hard for you. Then you're going to lose your queen. So bishop to d5. Black defends his bishop. Again, queen d7, connecting his rooks. Finally, white plays bishop a3. We trade the bishops. We put our rook in the center, rook f to d8, and white obviously doesn't like his rook on a1 and plays rook to d1. And this may surprise you. We're on move 17, and there's still several games because these moves made so much sense. And I was looking at this position with my engine at the time, and it turned out knight e6 was the common move, and white has a tiny advantage maybe because of the weakness of the d-pawn. But my engine said black is not worse if he plays the novelty, which I played, queen to g4. Okay, getting the queen active. What's the queen doing on d7? Just defending. Now, when I play knight e6, I have the very, very, very serious threat of knight f4, attacking the queen and the rook and threatening mate. And my engine said after queen g4, it preferred black. Still equal, but something like minus 0.01 instead of plus 0.01. And this is actually a move I got to play in 2011 against Ray Robson. He played the main line. I played the novelty. He didn't know it. I drew the game very easily. No trouble at all. I would play this again. And obviously, we're almost leaving the scope of the video. This is an opening video. But hey, the position before queen g4, there's several games in this position, and black was playing knight e6. After the move queen g4, which I played in 2011, this line wasn't played anymore by white, but that's okay. We have more videos to look at, so we can see what white's doing now. So I hope you like that explanation of the main line. That was main line 1, and there were hundreds of games in that variation, and now it seems like black is just doing fine. White really can't get an advantage. Well, I like that position for black, and hopefully I get to do it again. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the Philidor Defense Series, and we'll see you next time with more videos. Bye, everybody. Hey everybody, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold here again with a new video in the Philidor Defense series. And this video I like to call Mainline 2. Hopefully you've watched Mainline 1. Now, this is the move order I like, as we've discussed in previous videos. And in the last video, in this position, we talked about my game with Ray Robson and Kasparov being white, all kinds of good stuff. And in that video, white played the move rook to e1. And hopefully you enjoyed that. This video, white plays a different way, plays the move a4, trying to gain space on the queen side immediately, since black's usually, pushing these queen side pawns and trying to gain space over here. The center's getting sort of closed over there. And it's not clear to some people whether the rook should be on f1 or e1. So they decided to play a4 because they know black is either going to play a6, b5, or c6, b5. And, well, now black's not going to do that. Okay. Now, in this position, several moves are played. I'm going to look at what I call the main line. Now, you might think Magnus Carlsen plays the main line, but actually, Magnus doesn't like to play the main line because then his opponent can make 20, 25 moves without thinking. So in this position, Magnus likes to play the move a6, okay, instead of the main line, which is the move c6. And super grandmasters also will play the move a5, which is, I would say, positionally interesting because both sides are sort of giving away their b5 and b4 squares. They're not able to defend them. And that's a big decision. I think Magnus likes a6 because you really take the square b5 away from your opponent's pieces. Okay, and I think Magnus's point is when he does move his pawns like b6, he can play bishop b7, and his bishop's not blocked by his c pawn, which we saw in the last video. Okay, now there's a very strong grandmaster from the Czech Republic named Laznička, and he likes to play c6, and he's about 2,700 FIDE. And I think when Magnus is playing the Philidor, he's just doing it to throw his opponents off. Yeah, he played the Philidor 1 game out of 30, and otherwise he's probably playing either the Berlin or the mainline Rio Lopez with black. But Laznička likes to play the Philidor, and he plays c6. Now, rook e1, nothing wrong with that. And if you like the move rook e1, or your opponent plays the move rook e1, you can see the last video we just transposed. Because in the last video, white played rook e1 and then a4. In this video, he'd play a4, then rook e1. But if we want to have our own video and have our own variation, well, then white plays the move bishop to a2. And that makes the bishop very safe. The previous video, we saw Ray Robson playing the move b3, defending his bishop on c4 because it's just sitting out there. Now after a2, it's pretty safe. And the bishop has this really nice long diagonal, and it can't be attacked. Okay, once again, the bishop on c8, not very good. So b6. And now we see something different. This actually reminds me of the Rio Lopez. The Rio Lopez Spanish opening, normally white's playing rook e1. But if you don't like rook e1, because your rook's on the e file and your queen's on the d file, you can switch them up. This actually happens in more than one opening. It actually happens to me sometimes when I'm white in a King's Indian. I have a choice of playing either rook e1 or, as white does here, queen e2 and rook d1. This way, our queen's on the e file and our rook's on the d file. That might be a little better for white because we want our rook opposing the black queen as opposed to our queen. And it takes an extra move, but the queen's certainly better on e2 than it is on d1, and we stop bishop a6. So queen a2 is a pretty good move. And bishop a6 is stopped. Black plays the move a6. This has been played several times. And now it's not clear what black is going to do next. b5, c5, d5. White has to be ready for everything. Rook to d1, as I said earlier, opposing the black queen. Black gets his queen out of there. Queen c7, avoiding the white rook and defending the e-pawn a little bit more. And now white at some point wants to get his bishop out, and he's not going to play b3 like the last video and block his bishop on a2. Bishop d2 would block his rook. Bishop f4 hangs the bishop. Well, we're left with e3 and g5, basically. Problem with bishop e3 is what are you going to do on knight g4? And white answers that question by playing h3. Now, there is no knight g4. And black plays the move rook b8, preparing to advance on the queen's side, and white advances on the queen's side first. Probably white's only chance for an opening advantage, which we also saw in the last video, d5, gaining space in the center. And now, this is very interesting. After taking on d5, white plays an unusual move that we see in some openings, namely the King's Indian. You see these kinds of moves where you normally just take with the knight without thinking, but there's a knight here, there's a knight ready to replace it, there's a bishop coming. That's not going to win the game for white. Instead, white takes with the bishop. He's hoping that black takes the bishop, so we have this beautiful knight on d5. That's just a great knight. And black's not going to fall for that. Black plays bishop b7. And once again, I want to say this looks like a Najdorf. Boy, it almost more than looks like a Najdorf. I want to say it is a Najdorf because I think if I played the Najdorf as black, I could get this position if I wanted to, assuming I made the same moves for white that got to this position. This is really the kind of structure we see in the Sicilian all the time. And the Najdorf is a very common opening at the Super GM level, so you would think they wouldn't mind having this position because they play the Najdorf all the time. Okay, white trades the bishops because that's black's good bishop. His other bishop is blocked by pawn. And now we want to get rid of this knight on f6 that's defending the d5 square, so we play bishop to g5. And what's funny is in Grandmaster play, this position has occurred 3 times in my database, and white has 3 out of 3. It's a pretty good score. However, when I turn on the engine, it says it's equal. And I think one of the reasons is 3 out of 3 is a pretty small sample size, so we can't get a lot from that. But more importantly, in the games I looked at, white was the higher rated player. White was 100 to 200 points higher in each instance. The better player was winning. That's sort of what we want in chess. And the engine says if black plays b5, which is a good move. Boy, does this look like a Najdorf. Then it says the position is just equal. Black has good compensation for the weak d5 square and the weak d6 pawn. He's got the initiative on the queen's side. He's got the open c file. He's going to put pressure on b2. He's going to put pressure on e4. So if you play the Najdorf with black, you should like this position. So this is about equal, and I think this line is very important. It needs more games. White's doing well so far, but time will tell whether that trend continues. Well, that was the main line 2 in the Philidor with, instead of rook e1, the move a4, and we see a different kind of position where both sides are fighting for the initiative. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with another video in the Philidor Defense series. We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Hey everybody, this is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with another video in this series on the Philidor defense. This video is on the g4 pawn sack. Now, whenever I look at the opening names in chess.com, I always like the way they name the openings. However, this one, they named the same way I did. Shocking. They called this the Shirov Gambit. And in fact, I guess in any opening when white sacrifices a pawn with g4, that's the Shirov Gambit. It happens in several openings. So we get down to a position we've looked at several times already. And here, we've only looked at one move, the move bishop c4. And when I prepared for Ray Robson in 2011, I was sure he'd play bishop c4. After the match ended, he told me he seriously considered playing the pawn sacrifice g4. And I said, you're not going to do that. Ridiculous. And he said, no, I almost played it. And I was surprised. The more I looked at it over the last few years, the more I liked it for white. I don't think white has the advantage, but I think it's a lot more dangerous than what I was thinking in 2011. So I did look at g4, but not seriously. And Shirov likes to sacrifice pawns. He likes to play g4. Obviously, white just wants to play g5 and say, where are you moving your knight? Now, you don't have to take the pawn on g4, but I mean, if somebody's going to sacrifice a pawn by making a move that you've prevented, I think you should take it. And that's my opinion. So if I was black, I would take the pawn. Other GMs don't necessarily disagree. Don't necessarily agree. Maybe they disagree with me. For example, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave has played the move G6. And he's like, well, why are you playing G4? What's that got to do with anything? So now if you play G5, the H5 square is pretty solidly defended, and maybe he'll go to F4 later. There's nothing wrong with G6. Play Bishop G7, castle, and you hope that Shirov or somebody like him doesn't checkmate you. You got to hope for something. There's nothing wrong with G6. Another move that's played by a lot of players is H6. Like, if you want to play G5, I'll defend G5 with H6. Nothing wrong with H6. Now, one of the more wild 2,700 players, if not the most wild, is Badur Jobava. He's a bad man. And Jobava plays, I would call the equally crazy, although maybe not so crazy since he's attacking in the center, counterattacking the flank attack, the move D5. Confusing the audience, as I like to say. And then I need an adult because I don't understand what's happening. Basically, White's up a tempo from a normal position because Black's played D6 and then D5. Unfortunately, his tempo is G4. So is that good or bad? Jobava says, no, this is good, D5. My bishop can get out. I'm attacking the center. What was the point of G4? And again, I think there's nothing wrong with any of those moves. I think D5 is okay. I think G6 is okay. I think H6 is okay. And that's why G4 is such an interesting move. I think there's a lot of moves Black can play, and we get unusual positions. And it's fresh for analysis. Chess at the top level doesn't have to be a boring draw. We see a lot of draws at the super GM level, but we don't have to see a lot of draws. We can see exciting things like this. All right, let's look at knight takes G4, which I think is the most important move. And now White plays rook to G1, taking the open G line. And here, once again, Black has more than one move. I guess the obvious move and the most popular move is knight G to F6, just putting the knight back on F6. Nothing wrong with that. If you want to play that, that's good. That's the most popular move. However, super grandmasters and grandmasters like myself, weaker grandmasters, are playing the move E takes D4. And they want to use the E5 square for their knights. I mean, the square's there. Why not use it? And I guess in some instances we don't have we don't have a square to spare, but here we do. We have a square to spare. All right. If only Elaine Bennis was watching. All right. So White doesn't want to lose the knight on C3 and totally destroy his pawn structure after something like this. That looks pretty ugly. It looks like Black has an extra pawn and the compensation, so that's not good. So instead, White takes on D4 with the knight. Makes sense. And here, we can play 2 or 3 different moves. The most popular move is actually knight D to E5. That's not the move that I recommend, but again, that's nothing wrong with it. And now we can get super sharp and crazy. White could make a big mistake here and play F4, thinking he's winning something. He's attacking so many things. But after Queen H4 check, he may regret that decision. I know I do. Yeah, and now White's just losing. So can't do that. And Black's up a pawn, and Black seems like he has nice knights. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's the most popular line. Another move that I think is good is just going back to F6. And I like the fact that Black's traded on D4 because now his knight has a couple of squares to go to. He can always play G6 bishop G7, which thwarts the rook on G1. And now the bishop G7 has an open diagonal. If we play like MVL did earlier with our pawn on E5, then we don't have the open diagonal for our bishop yet. So I sort of like this way of playing better. This seems like, to me, White doesn't have enough compensation, but that's more my style. I don't like giving up pawns in the opening for speculative play. Unless I'm playing bullet chess, then I'll do anything. And this is a very sharp, complicated line that really meets Shirov's style. White has more space. White has the open file. And probably White's going to castle queenside. Leaving the king in the center doesn't look good. And these positions are fresh for new ideas and new games And we haven't seen a ton of games because a lot of people at the top level don't necessarily like to play like Shirov and sacrifice a pawn early. Although I must admit, having studied Ray Robson's games, he is a guy that'll play a little speculative and do some preparation and get an interesting position. So if you have the white pieces, G4 is a very interesting move where you can get some interesting play and have some of your own opening analysis. And if you're black, I think G4 is a little bit scary. And I think you should decide, let's go back to the G4 position. You should make a decision beforehand and not here. Am I going to play G6 like MVL, H6, the crazy Jobava D5, or the simple and sound take the pawn? Why are you sacrificing a pawn? It's more dangerous than I gave it credit for in 2011. I don't think it's that good for white, but I think it's playable. It's just not something that I would do. I like taking pawns in the opening, and I think a lot of the online commentators you guys like, they like taking pawns too. All right, this is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the Shirov-esque G4 pawn sacrifice. Maybe a little suspicious, maybe you think it's okay, and you have to decide for yourself, do you like being up a pawn and giving your opponent a little play, or do you like sacking a pawn and making the game really interesting from the outset, taking your opponent out of their prep? Double-edged question, interesting situation. We'll have to have more Grandmaster games to get a final diagnosis of this is okay for white or not. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the Philidor defense. Watch for more videos and see you next time here on chess.com. Bye, everybody. Everybody, this is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with a video in the Philidor Defense series. And in our first video with an overview discussed in the opening, I remember telling you that in this position, which comes from the main line, the most common move is E takes D4, which is a move we haven't looked at yet. But I have a good excuse, and that excuse is I don't play this way. I play the move D6 first, and I actually can't get this position. However, I would actually recommend E takes D4 because I don't like the other variations for black with knight D7 or knight F6. That's just me. And we're going to have 2 videos on the move E takes D4 because there's many different variations. We're going to concentrate on 2 different lines. Now, white can take with the queen, but it's much more common to take with the knight.
Shadow turns to sun rays, and on we'll go through the wastelands, through the highways, and on shadow turns to sun rays, and on we'll go through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
and we get this position. Grandmaster Mamedov likes to play the move g6, which is pretty unpopular, but he likes to do it. So if you like those kind of Pierce, King's Indian positions with black, and you want to play variations that your opponent's not ready for, you want to play your own way, which I guess Mamedov wants to do, then g6 is fine. Normally for my students, I tell them you don't want to make a lot of pawn moves in the opening, especially if you can develop your bishop and you make another pawn move to develop your bishop that's unnecessary. You're wasting time. That's very dangerous with black. So I'm not a big fan of g6. Most grandmasters are. We already played e5, so we already have a square for our bishop. Sort of like we played d6. We have a lot of squares for this bishop, so I'm not going to move my b pawn in this variation. Okay, so bishop e7. And this is where we're going to differentiate the two videos that start with e takes d4. There's basically two moves here that are very common for white, and we're going to talk about g3 in this video. This is a favorite of many grandmasters, including Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand. So whether you're in the Magnus camp or the Anand camp, you can still play g3. And it's not as popular as the other moves. When I say not as popular, in the hundreds and thousands of games, it's not the most common, but at the very top level, playing what Magnus and Vishy do is probably a good idea. You can also play bishop e2, or bishop c4, or bishop f4, and we'll talk about that in a later video. Okay, so g3, fianchettoing the bishop, castles. Now, Magnus has had black in this position also, and he's played the move knight c6, which is fine. And there was actually a game between Magnus and Mamedyarov where Mamedyarov tried to punish g3 by playing the Jobava-like d5 very early. And you get some crazy positions with e5, knight e4, which Mamedyarov would like. Probably he would like either side. That's the way he plays. Okay, and normally when you have the black pieces, you want to develop first. Develop your pieces and maybe play a little crazy later. Okay, so castles is, I guess, the more sane move, or popular move. Okay, bishop g2, rook to e8, putting pressure down the e line, white castles. And now, my favorite move, bishop to f8. Always play bishop f8. And that's one of the reasons in a lot of openings, white plays rook e1 or black plays rook e8. The idea is we're going to put our bishop on f1 or f8. It's defending the king side. It's defending the long diagonal, and it opens up the line for our rook. It doesn't block the other pieces. Now, this isn't a super exciting position. I think Vishy and Magnus think white has a slight advantage. White's very safe. White has a small leading development. And this is also rich for ideas because black can play knight c6, black can play knight d7, and put his knight on either c5 or e5. The bishop can go to d7 or g4, sometimes both. It's a very interesting position that doesn't have a lot of super grandmaster games, so it's fresh with new ideas. And here, the grandmasters who have played white, they either play the move h3, which obviously is taking away the g4 square for black, and now we can play bishop e3 at our leisure and not allow knight g4. Or if we don't care about bishop e3, you can just play bishop to f4, also very reasonable. Now, a lot of you are confused. You're like, wait a minute, why didn't Ben say bishop g5? I'm pinning the knight. And I want to tell you a secret. When you play g3 in almost any opening, bishop g5 sometimes doesn't go well because after h6, well, I like to play bishop h4 when I pin somebody's knight, but not when I play g3, because after bishop h4, your bishop's trapped. So if you do play bishop g5 here, which grandmasters don't play, you're either going to have to trade your bishop off or you're just losing a tempo and going back. So bishop g5 really isn't a move here. Bishop f4 is a very common move. We're going to play queen d2, put our rooks in the center, and claim that we have an advantage. And black's like, why do you have the advantage? I have a solid position. I can get my bishop and knight out. My rook's on the open line. I have pressure on the e-pawn. I think it's equal. The computer prefers white slightly, which is the case with a lot of openings. If you don't like bishop f4, you can also play h3. And again, not only can white play bishop e3, white can play more aggressively with something like g4 and put pressure on black right away. In fact, Mammadov would be proud because I think at a lot of times when he plays bishop f8, black's seriously considering g6, bishop g7. And obviously, if black did do that, he's 2 tempi down from what Mammadov does. He plays g6 right away. So that's the g3 variation. It's not the most exciting one, but that's okay. We have more excitement coming up. And that's after we play e takes d4 early. A lot of the super grandmasters like to play g3, fianchetto the bishop, defending the e-pawn, and have sort of a slight advantage. I think those are positions I would take with either color because things will develop later, and you get to show your middle game prowess, and there's a lot of different options. You're not forced into doing one thing. You can do your own thing. And so I sort of like that. All right, this is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with an early e takes d4 with white playing g3. Next video, we're going to see white do something more aggressive, maybe a little bit more fun for you guys, maybe too much fun for some people. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the Philidor Defense video series here on chess.com. Bye-bye, everybody. Hey everybody, it's Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with another video in the Philidor Defense series. And this is a continuation of the previous video where black plays an early e takes d4, which I recommend in this position. Not the move order I play. If you play this move order, I think you should take on d4. Okay, in the last video, we saw white play for a small, stable advantage with the move g3. Very reasonable. Here, white plays for more. So if you like exciting chess, not just watching it, but playing it, this is the line for you. And one of the ways to try to refute slightly unusual openings black plays is to play very aggressively. That's not the way I like to do it, but sometimes it works. And here, white decides he's going to castle queenside, and he plays the move bishop f4. Going to castle queenside, you better get your pieces out of the way. Okay, and castles, queen d2 obviously, and now we're ready to castle queenside. Now, what's funny about this, I would say 95% of the time when there's a move that's quote unquote popular, then there's a move that's popular with the super GMs. The super GMs move is more solid and stable. However, we have the 5% of the time where it's the opposite. The most popular move is the move knight c6. Developing a piece. Makes sense. Super GMs, they decided, well, if I play slow and boring and normal, I'd rather have white. White has a more aggressive position. We're going to punish white for not castling kingside. We're going to punish white for the fact that his king is in the center and I've already castled. I like that way of thinking. And how are you going to punish white? You're going to open the center. How do you open the center? Easy, d5. d5, the most popular move at the super grandmaster level, but not at the lower level. Very unusual. Okay, and if you don't know this line with white, you can get in a lot of trouble. Already, black has a threat, taking on e4. Black also wants to play c5 and d4. And also with the pawn on d6, as we said in the overview video, the bishop is blocked. Now with the pawn not on d6, we can really put some pressure on white. Well, white played queen d2, and so with the king on e1 and the queen on d2, it makes a lot of sense to play bishop b4. So black's like, all right, you've tempted me to play bishop b4, let's play d5. Now what's wrong with d5? Well, white played bishop f4, has this open diagonal now, and white's going to take advantage of that. Best move for white is also super aggressive, knight d to b5 with obvious threats to the c7 pawn. And we're unleashing the white queen on d5. So this pawn's attacked 3 times, this pawn's attacked 2 times. It's a double attack. Of course, black ignores both attacks. That's why chess is a difficult game and plays the aforementioned bishop to b4. Well, it doesn't really ignore the attack on d5. It does pin the knight. Okay, and now when there's lots of tactics happening and lots of things are possible to capture, usually that favors the person with the safer king. So, well, black's king is safer than white's. It's clear. All right. Now, I think a lot of lower ranked players would take a pawn and attack a queen with bishop c7. That's actually a bad move because after queen e7, we don't really have a good continuation. We got a lot of problems going on here, lots of issues, and the bishop is defended by the knight, which I can easily play a6 and kick it. So this is not good for white. That was a little too greedy. Knight takes c7 is also an obvious move. It's also bad. Black plays d4, ignoring it, which is black's idea behind bishop b4. And if you take the rook, I play knight takes e4. That's way too much play for black. Okay, you can't really get away with this as white. Even the computer likes black, and the computers love being up a rook. But the knight on a8 is silly. White's king is silly. White's queen is silly. White's knight. White's getting in a lot of trouble here. And the computer thinks black is just about winning. Okay, after bishop to b4, instead of being really greedy and taking on c7, well, let's play the move we were going to play anyway, and that's castles. Okay, now we're slightly less pinned. We're not going to get in trouble on the e-file, and we're attacking d5 even more. Okay, and the antidote for black, some think, is the move c6. Defending d5, attacking the knight, saving the pawn on c7, in for a penny, in for a pound, knight c7, trying to win the rook, and black plays the move knight takes e4. Surprisingly, there's a lot of games in this position, mainly in rapid and blitz, with 2,800 players. It's such an interesting position. White's definitely going to win that rook on a8 later, although I'm not sure his knight's going to get out. And white's going to get attacked all over the place. His queen's attacked, knight's attacked, and if he ends up trading on c3 and taking with the b pawn, his king's going to get attacked. It's very dangerous. And in this position, white has two moves that grandmasters have played, queen d4 and queen e3. In fact, they seem to be split on which one is better. I'm not sure personally which one is better. The computer obviously prefers white because white's going to take that rook on a8. Computers love material. In my praxis and my understanding of chess, when somebody's taking pieces and the other person is mating them, in supercomputer chess, the computer finds the defense and doesn't get mated. In human chess, it's very hard to defend against this big attack from black, where the knight is pinned, the queen's attacked, the white king's going to get exposed. So the knight's going to be trapped on a8. If I was going to play this line with either side, I would do a lot more preparation than go to move 10, because I would be really worried. I wouldn't play this line with either side. It's way too dangerous. It would be fun in blitz chess. So queen d4 or queen e3, those are the popular moves. It seems like white is doing well. The computer likes white, but I'm not so sure. This will be a very interesting middle game. And it just goes to show you, in this line, when we looked at the previous video, it wasn't super interesting when white played the move g3 here. That was the last video. All of a sudden, with the move bishop f4, all heck broke loose. White was going to win a rook. Black was going to mate white, castling opposite sides. It shows you how interesting chess is. And even within the same opening, you can get different kinds of positions. Well, that was the exciting bishop f4 variation in the Philidor, where black plays an early e takes d4. And there, white actually castled queenside. Makes sense. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with another video in the Philidor Defense series, and we'll see you next time with more videos here on chess.com. Bye, everyone. Hey everybody, Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with a new video in the Philidor Defense series. I think this is the most fun video. Maybe not.
Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream, believe in strength. Now I'm the only one, only one. Until I broke the rules, my life destroyed. Life destroyed. Until I walk awake, scream my mind, I shout, the ground shakes. How much can I take? My mind will break. Will it break? Can I take? Can I be your superhero? Superhero. Can I be your superhero? Superhero. Superhero. Fly away. It's the first time of today. Today. To dream, believe. You are the strength, you're all I need. Need. Oh, gonna give it a shot. Only one of me to shield you all from the enemy. You're a superhero. You're a superhero. Can I be your superhero? Superhero. 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 Can I be your superhero?
Not the best line for black, but definitely the most interesting. So again, if black plays the move order that I don't play, which is e5 right away, we saw that black could take on d4, which I think is the best move and actually the most common. However, 200, 300 years ago, maybe even 150 years ago, there was another move that was very interesting that would scare anybody who doesn't know it, and that's the move f5. And wow, f5 is a lot different than the other videos. We play super aggressively right away, and in fact, this has even been played by none other than one of my favorite GMs, Hikaru Nakamura. Loves to play dangerous, interesting, unusual chess. Normally, he would save that kind of thing for blitz or bullet and wouldn't risk this against somebody like Magnus. Okay, now f5 was pretty popular in the 1800s, and it's died down since most grandmasters think white gets an advantage playing almost anything. And you would probably admit that black opening the diagonal to his king and being behind in development isn't the best idea. But it is super interesting, and if you know the lines well, it's pretty likely your opponent doesn't know the move f5. The reputation isn't good, and people say, well, that move's not considered good, so my opponent won't play that. Of course, that's after hundreds of years of analysis. Okay, now there's 4 moves here that are reasonable. There's bishop c4, d takes e5, e takes f5, and the move that I think is the best, that's the most common, is to develop a piece. And that's knight c3. And actually, this will be the first video where we see actually a forced win. And black tries to show why he played the move f5 by taking the e-pawn. And the point of this variation is to play the move d5. So we're getting rid of white's e-pawn with the side f-pawn and getting this big center. Now, the most famous game ever played in this particular position was the game Bird versus Morphy. And that's the famous Bird from Bird's opening, which is f4 on move 1, played recently by Grishuk against Wesley So. And also the Bird's defense of the Ruy Lopez, where black plays knight d4 on move 3. And in this position, Bird made the slight error of playing the move knight to g3. Can't really blame him, his knight's attacked. The reason it's an error is I think more or less white has a forced win here. And, well, okay, in the 1850s and 1860s, they didn't really have engines helping them with analysis. So Morphy won that game, and instead, white should play the super aggressive knight e to g5. Very strong move. And now black has 2 moves. I think they both lose. If black plays the move h6, white continues with his aggression with the very fun knight f7, forking the queen and rook. The king has to take, knight e5 check. And, well, you got some issues here. The king's going to start running around, and it's never going to stop. It's not like white's going to attack for 1 or 2 moves, and that'll be the end of his attack. White's going to attack until the end of the game. Black's king is never going to find safety. King e8, obviously, queen h5 is good. Can't do that. King e7, we play knight g6 and win the rook in the corner. And if you play king e6, the computer thinks that after several moves, white has a winning advantage. It prefers bishop d3, getting more pieces involved. That king is not good on e6, not good. Computer also likes bishop b5, stopping the king from running away later, which also is a good move. Giving white a winning advantage. Okay. H6 really isn't a move you would play because you really should develop your pieces. Okay, a more obvious looking move is the move e4, attacking the knight, and that's why we played e5 and d5 to continue our advance at the center. And after knight e5, we already have 2 winning threats, either knight to f7, and unfortunately, white hasn't sacrificed anything. That's hard to believe. White has such a dominating kind of position, and material's equal. Okay, the only way to stop the knights from coming in is to defend f7 with knight h6. And the reason this is a forced win for white is because of the amazing, brilliant move that's coming up. maybe pause your video and try to find it. If I was playing a game, even in a slow tournament, and I didn't know this move, I would not find it. Now I know the move, so I probably would find it. And that move is, drum roll, knight takes e4. An amazing move. And the idea is actually very simple. We want to play bishop takes h6. And my rating isn't high enough where I can jump over pieces yet. Maybe Magnus can do that. Okay, so if we don't take the knight, then white just took a center pawn, and white's up a pawn, and white's threatening bishop h6 anyway. So if you're going to be losing, you might as well be a piece up. Take the knight, take on h6. The computer plays queen f6, and after bishop e3, I believe, that's right, white's up a pawn for nothing. I would argue white's also better. White has two minor pieces out. Black has an isolated pawn on e4. Black's moved his queen out, so it looks terrible for black. Okay, and the reason the computer plays queen f6 is after the more logical pawn takes bishop on h6, the computer announces checkmate. Probably you guys don't see checkmate in 11, but it takes the computer about a second. Okay, everybody would play queen h5 check. King e7 is the only legal move. King d6 is the only legal move. King c6 is the only legal move. Makes it easy to analyze. Okay, now if you play king to b6, now there's two legal moves. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. I think it's made in two moves. Queen b3 check and queen b5 mate. So that's obviously not good for black. So king d6 is the correct move. And now this is actually very funny. In this position, we play the move bishop to b5. Okay, and we're trying to trap the king. You may have noticed after knight c4 check, the king has the square c6. After bishop to b5, this king does not have the square c6, so knight c4 is mate. We have to stop knight c4 mate. Now, if super grandmasters look at this position, they just laugh because they see this king, they see all the white pieces, and it looks like a game played 200 years ago. It doesn't look like a game played now. But computers and humans who aren't super grandmasters, we have to analyze these positions, because if you don't mate them, well, then black's up a piece. Okay, so bishop e6 stops the mate. Knight takes b7 check, one legal move. c4 check, one legal move. Castles check, one legal move. f4 check. Now, if you're not a strong chess player, you might think f4 check is mate. Looks like mate. Luckily, the en passant rule exists, so we can play one more move. And then rook e1 mate, completing development. Yeah, that's not a good line for black. So going back and refuting that variation, after the move e4, where black looks like he has a very nice center, white's completely winning after the brilliant move knight takes e4 with the idea bishop takes h6, queen h5 check. This is just one line that white can play. Grandmasters don't play the move f5 anymore. If you're going to play the move f5 in this position, I would save it for blitz or bullet, and maybe for somebody who likes to play really boring, solid chess, and they won't like these lines that are super sharp. But the soundness of f5, I cannot vouch for it. I think this is just very good for white. But there's a lot of interesting games played 100, 150, 200 years ago where black actually did okay because white didn't play the refutations that some grandmasters have found with the use of engines. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold. I hope you liked that enjoyable video, and watch out for more videos in the Philidor defense right here on chess.com. Bye, everybody. Hey everyone, Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with another great video in our series on the Philidor defense. Now, so far we've looked at pretty normal play. We looked at black going a little crazy with f5 on move 3. Now we're going to look at white going crazy. And this actually is more common. At the lower levels, people like to go crazy and quote-unquote refute the opening. And, well, you can't really refute it. So some people go too far. Now, if we get to our main position, which we've discussed several times, and we can get here from either move order, the move order where black plays e5 first, or the one I play with d6 first. So far, we've only looked at white castling, black castling, and playing super grandmaster chess. But some people aren't super grandmasters, and they try to bust the opponent up right away. And there's a couple of moves that do that. We're going to look at one of the moves now, and one of the other moves in another video. The first move that's pretty common at the lower levels, I don't think a grandmaster's ever played it, is bishop takes f7 check. And this is actually fascinating. If you don't know what to do, you can easily get in trouble. If you know what to do, you're going to be very happy your opponent did this. Okay, and the idea is to play knight g5 check. You got 4 legal moves, and 3 of them are really terrible. Got to play the right move. King e8, your queen is trapped. Frankly, terrible. King f8, you get forked. And I mean, I can't play king g6. I can't get myself to do that. I mean, if my opponent gets to play h5 or f5, I resign. So I can't put my king on g6. Probably knight e6 also wins. King g6 is terrible. Okay, king g8 is the right move. That's the only move that's played. And black's up a piece, and white's like, no problem. I'm going to go win that rook in the corner. Attacking the queen. The queen has one move. Forking the queen and rook. Now, if you don't know this position, might play queen d8. That way when he takes the rook, the knight's trapped. Okay, makes sense. Knight can't get out. That's probably okay for black, but that's probably okay for white. It's much more aggressive and strong to play the move queen g6 and ignore the knight and attack the white king. And, of course, if white gets afraid of knight e4 and queen g2 and decides to play defense, then he's not taking the rook, and white's just down a piece. And white didn't play knight c7 to not take the rook. So you got to take that rook, otherwise black's not material. Okay, and queen g2 is totally forcing the move rook f1. So the rook's hanging. So rook f1. And now it looks like black's down the exchange with some interesting compensation because all the pieces are very strangely placed. The knight on a8, the rook on f1, king on e1. And this is also strange, king on g8, rook on h8. But turns out this is very good for black because black has the very strong e takes d4. And actually, in the video where white plays an early g4, we saw black do this with the idea of getting e5 for either one of the knights. What's funny is white doesn't have a g pawn here either. Strange. And we have the very same idea, except knight e5 is much stronger in this position than it was in the previous normal position. After queen takes d4, we play the move knight e5. And I can guarantee you, you don't want black to play knight f3 check. Unless you have the black pieces, then you want black to play that. We've prevented queen c4 check, and we've prevented queen d5 check, so there's no checks. And you can't let him play knight f3 check, winning your queen. You can't let him do it. Yeah, unfortunately for white, after knight e5, we're also unleashing our bishop on c8, which heretofore was blocked by the knight. So bishop g4 and bishop h3 are both crushing. The only move for white, I think, is f4. And the idea is, if you play knight f3, I can take it. And I'm giving the exchange back, but I'm already up the exchange. So who knows what's going on? And, well, it's really good for black that he has a winning move here. And that's why nobody plays the move bishop takes f7 check, which we basically are making the video about because of this move. This move didn't exist Maybe some people would play bishop takes f7 check, but the only people who are playing it now are people who don't know the line. And this move is winning because it unleashes the other bishop. When you play knight e5, this bishop can get out. This bishop wants to go to h4 check, which obviously would be winning. So we play the move knight f to g4. And white is dead lost. Black's threatening bishop h4 check, and there's no defense. This king is a sitting duck. And what's funny is, funny from Black's point of view, not only did we unleash the bishop, we also controlled f2 a little bit more. So we can't even block with the rook after bishop f2. And after bishop h4 check, the king has one legal move, but your rook is hanging. So here, Black's down the exchange, but okay, white's knight is terrible on a8. White hasn't moved his pieces yet. And Black's pieces, conversely, are just all over the white king. Yeah, even knight h2 is a strong move, also winning. So Black has way too many threats. Black has a winning position. What's funny is white sacrificed a bishop to get at Black's king, and eventually he made so many knight moves. Knight f3, knight g5, knight e6, knight c7, knight a8, and neglected his development. His own king got in trouble. It's perfectly logical. When you make too many moves in the opening with the same piece, your other pieces suffer, and here, white's king is suffering and Black's winning. That's the refutation of bishop takes f7 check. No grandmaster would play that. It's interesting if your opponent doesn't know it, maybe you're playing a blitz game, but otherwise, you just get in a lot of trouble. Well, this is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the very fun bishop takes f7 check, and watch for more videos here on chess.com in the Philidor defense. See you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with an exciting video in our series on the Philidor defense. And we go to the main line position, and White's decided he's played too many normal moves. It's time to play exciting. In our last video, we saw the bishop sacrifice bishop f7. That didn't work. Now, I was playing a very strong junior player in Chicago about 6 years ago, and I had this position. I like to play sort of boring against the young kids and, outmaneuver them slowly with my old man chess. In fact, I recently had a birthday, so now I'm playing older man chess. Anyway, one of my opponents played a move I didn't know. Very aggressive move. Knight g5. Got to make a video on that. Okay, the threat is obvious and the defense is obvious. Whenever they play knight g5 in double king pawn openings, if it's legal, you castle. So I did. And now he plays bishop f7 check. And this is a big difference from the previous bishop f7, because now when I take it, I can't take it with the king. When I took with the king and they played knight g5 check, my king went to g8. Well, my king's still on g8, but instead of my rook on h8, my rook's on f7. And you might think, great, rook's on f7, better than h8. I agree. However, I can't play queen g6, which I played in the last video. So after knight e6, you have to play queen e8, knight takes c7. And we actually saw this exact position in the last video with the black rook on h8, and I played queen g6. Well, can't do that now. So I play queen d8. And luckily, because I didn't know this line, my opponent doesn't have a forced draw with knight e6, knight c7. And the reason is my queen can escape. Otherwise, I'd be playing a 2200 and be forced draw. Okay, so instead he plays knight takes a8. And for the first time in the game, I had to do some serious thinking. And in general, grandmasters like myself seriously prefer two pieces to a rook and pawn, even two pieces for rook and two pawns, with the exception of late in the endgame. In the endgame, when we're making queens, I'll take some pawns. But in the opening and middle game, I'll take pieces all day. I'm not especially scared of these rooks. Okay, so first of all, we have to go get his knight. And that's not easy to do. I can't take his knight. So I played b6. Now I have two ideas. I can move my bishop out of the way and take his knight. Or if allowed, and I was allowed, I can play bishop a6 and stop him from castling. And in my opinion, in this position, white should play the move that we're going to talk about as the main line. Instead, my opponent played the move bishop to e3. Okay. And, well, after the correct move, I think d takes e5. Black can take either way on e5. I prefer knight takes. Knight takes scores better. I really like the knights, when they're active, not when knight's back on d7, unleashes the bishop. And I'm going to take black here all day. The computer says it's about equal, but grandmasters don't play this way with white. They prefer pieces to, one piece. Bishop and knight's better than a rook. We don't really care about how many pawns white has. White's not getting any passed pawns. White's pawns aren't suffocating black. Black just has more pieces. And this piece is going to go away on a8. We're going to take that over the next three moves. When white does castle kingside, there's no pieces in front of white's king like there usually is. Black has very good chances for attack. Very good. Okay. So I recommend this for black, not for white. White's shouldn't play knight g5. But I have a funny example to show you to really prove my point. My opponent didn't play d takes e5. He didn't want to give away his center pawn. He didn't want to take with the queen later, so he played the move bishop e3. And unfortunately for him, I get to play bishop a6 and stop him from castling. And, well, it was lucky this happened because I've shown this game to many of my students. My opponent decided to save a tempo. I should say he cost himself a tempo at the cost of a pawn. If I take his knight, I get his knight for free, but white could make a move in the interim, and then I would take his knight. Instead, he gave his knight away right away, getting a pawn, but helping me develop. And now he made the losing move. Maybe white can still hold on here, but he didn't want me to play queen takes b2 for obvious reasons, and played the move b3. And this is something I always want to show everybody because it's so exciting. And it shows you what happens when your king is on e1 the whole game and your opponent castled early. You get punished in the center. Joe Bava would be proud of me. It's the only time in my life Joe Bava will be proud of me. The move d5. And the purpose is to play the move bishop to b4. If you're going to play the Philidor with black, it often happens the knight on d7 moves and gets out of the way of the bishop, and the pawn on d6 move getting out of the way of the other bishop. My opponent ignored that and attacked my queen, and I ignored that and played bishop to b4. And the line is sort of forced. Take my queen, I take your knight with check, you have one legal move, I take with check, I take with check, and now I can take his bishop two different ways. Do you see which way is better? One way is good, one way is not good. Well, the reasoning is white's threatening e6, forking. So you take with the knight. Now there's no more fork. Black has three pieces for a rook. Now usually two pieces beats a rook. Three pieces really beats a rook. White has a few more pawns, but I'll take pieces over pawns any day. The computer says black's winning, and I won pretty easily. And that's the punishment white gets in this video and the bishop takes f7 check video, where here he's playing knight g5. He's neglecting his development. In the previous videos where super grandmasters are playing, they castle, they get their bishop out on c1, they move their queen, they put their rooks in the center, they play in the middle. In the super crazy videos where white's sacking on f7 and playing knight g5, he's not castling, leaving his king on e1, and you can see how you could easily get punished because of that, and you do. So developing your pieces and castling is better than playing for tricks and leaving your king in the center of the whole game. Then if your opponent plays accurately, you get punished. You can save these bishop takes f7 and knight g5 ideas for blitz and bullet and hope your opponent doesn't know it. Then it gets really exciting. If your opponent's well honed on theory, those moves just don't work. Well, that was our video series on the Philidor. Again, safe and sound and normal is the way to go. If somebody goes crazy and tries to win right away, you can punish them with either color. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold with the video series Philidor Defense for Chess.com. Hope to see you in the future with more video series. Bye, everybody.
with